declare the meeting open, and a reminder that the meeting is being webcast, and you should refrain from making any defamatory statements. I acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral land of the Ngunnawal people. I recognise the Ngunnawal as the traditional custodians and pay respect to the elders of the community and their descendants. The prayer again. It's too short. Let us be still and remember the presence of God as we commence our meeting. Let us together pray for guidance and help. All say together, Almighty God, we ask for the blessing of this council, direct and prosper our deliberations to the true welfare of Australia and the people of Yass Valley. Amen. Do we have any apologies? All present? Any declarations of pecuniary interests?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a pecuniary interest on item 6.1, which covers the New South Wales employment zones reform. And I own a business in the rezoning area, and while I acknowledge this is just an administrative change, I'll just leave the business, the building just in case. Happy to step out.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other declarations? If not, we'll move on to confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of March. Minutes have been circulated. Councillor Reid? Moved, seconded Councillor Burgess. Any questions? Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried.
Mr. Mayor, we have a couple of late reports. In accordance with 9.3 of the Code of Meeting Practice, they can be accepted into the meeting, obviously by motion of council, but the chair needs to be satisfied that they're of great urgency on the grounds that they require a decision of council before the next scheduled meeting. I suggest that it might be useful to actually deal with each one in turn rather than do it as a block. So the first first report, late report, is a development application at 2090 Sutton Road, Sutton. This application has been in for some time. We're basically beyond the timeframes for actually making a decision on a development application. We've gone past the 40 days. That puts us in risk of a potential appeal against failing to make a decision. So that's a reason it's been brought before council as an urgent matter.
Well, I'm satisfied that it is of sufficient urgency. Would someone like to move?
I'd like to move that way.
Yes. Councillor Abbey, seconded. Councillor Turner, moved. Councillor Abbey, seconded. Okay, any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Declare it carried.
Okay, councillors, the second late report is the naming of the Walker Park grandstand. Again, the last council meeting, council considered a couple of options and asked for a report to come back to this council meeting. The exhibition period didn't finish until the close of business, or the close of Monday, Tuesday morning. So that report has been drafted and is presented for consideration in accordance with council's wishes.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Moved. Councillor Turner, seconded. Councillor Potham. Any discussion? All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried.
Mr. Mayor, can I just also mention that the staff member who was the author of the report for Sutton Road, Sutton, is here with us. Kate has come in off maternity leave to answer any questions that council may have. Can I suggest that after the mayoral minute that council may consider moving that as bringing that business forward for consideration?
Which one?
The development application for 2090 Sutton Road. That's the late report.
Ones that we've just accepted.
Move that it be brought forward.
I'll move the adoption of the mayoral report. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Any questions on the mayoral minute?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a short comment to say that I look forward to seeing Yass Valley Council statistics as part of the discussion as opposed to just the state governments when it comes to health / education / roads. but
Something a little more factual rather than estimates.
Thank you, councillor Jones.
Okay, well,
Question,
yes,
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
apologise.
Learn to apologise, I think. I was just going to ask a question. The third part of that is getting a councillor involved with the committee. Are we doing that now, or are we doing it later? And or is that sort of somewhat up in the air at the moment?
I think it's probably appropriate we dealt with it now. So we probably just need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, and then but it might be useful to actually nominate a councillor to be inserted into that third dot point.
Okay, move.
Yeah.
Councillor Cameron, seconded Councillor Potham. Any discussion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, are we endorsing that and also selecting?
I would suggest it would be good to select somebody, so we could forward that nomination to the.
Someone better put their hand up.
I'm putting my hand up to nominate Councillor Jones. That's for the local traffic committee.
I'll second that. I'm sure Councillor Jones does accept that.
I heartily accept the nomination, thank you very much.
So we have one nomination. Any further nominations? We don't need any further ones, but competition's nice occasionally. If not, prepared to vote? All those in favour? Those against? Congratulations, Councillor Jones. Right, so that's a mayoral minute out of the way. The nomination.
Just deal with that late report for something.
So we go now to the report on the development application number 200273, 66 lot community title subdivision in Sutton. Someone like to move recommendation? Move Councillor Jones, second Councillor Potham. Okay.
While I'm on my feet, can I just firstly thank our staff member who's here with us, Kate, for a monumental effort of very early days of maternity leave in carrying the ball forward for our team. This has been with us for a while, and then I understand with the department for a while. Firstly, I'd like to request that Kate probably brings us up to speed on how very different this proposal is in terms of what we've dealt with in the past, because just through my experience on council, trying to get protections such as the superb parrots in Gundaroo was a very clunky affair, trying to do it in the rezoning stages. So I just wanted to ask her what new way forward are we seeing with what's being proposed to be adopted today?
So,
Can we bring Kate back?
Thank you, Kate. Come forward.
so essentially, I'll try and answer, I think, what you're after. So essentially what it's doing is certifying the entire site, sorry, not the entire site, but parts of the site for future development. So in terms of like my team, when a DA comes in at the moment, every DA is assessed for its impacts on biodiversity, whereas when a DA comes in over this site, that's already been looked at, as long as it's in that in the certified area. So it's achieving, instead of say site by site assessments, it's being looked at in a much broader sense. It's a great outcome in terms of biodiversity and I guess locking away, not locking away, but in effect locking up those values and looking up, like enhancing them long term. It's actually not just avoiding them now. It's actually, there'll be management plans put in place to actually enhance those values moving forward. So I guess, yeah, instead of site by site, it's looking at the whole site. If that helps.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
through you, Mr. Mayor, can you tell us about the stewardship sites and what it means for this development, but what can you also see on the horizon for the rest of Yass Valley in terms of using that as a tool?
So again, sorry, I'll have to refer to my notes, that's okay. Yeah, so the proponent, it's the intent of the proponent to enter into the stewardship agreements. So what that does is identifies management actions that they must undertake. Further detailed studies have to be undertaken for each site. They then agree to management actions, the landowners do, and then those management actions generate credits. And as you can see in here, there's credits generated by the impact of the development. So this particular developer can use the credits generated to offset the impacts. Again, it's essentially locking away, I don't want to say locking away because you can still use the site, but essentially it's protecting those values. And in terms of the broader Yass Valley, I think it's a great way of, I guess, advertising that this can be done, that you can have these values these biodiversity values on your site and actually use, like, they can be a benefit to you, as opposed to sort of, I know other people have said in the past, I've done all this planting, and I've looked after my site and now I can't develop it, or I can't subdivide it, or whatever it might be. But this is another, I guess, avenue, so you can actually generate credits essentially. It's, I guess, promoting a positive aspect of having a value in the site.
And through Mr. Mayor, one final question for our wonderful planning officer. One thing that struck me as missing in all of this, and from the state government, not from our work, is the ability to ask for cat containment in this kind of subdivision where we've got superb parrot or threatened bird species.
Yeah.
Is there anything we could advocate to the state government, do you believe, that would assist us in the future if we could say, and by the way, no cats in this particular
I
subdivision?
might have to refer back.
That's okay.
Yeah, look, the difficulty we've got at the moment is that cats are permitted to roam, for instance, in New South Wales. It's not quite the same in the ACT jurisdiction. But it's certainly something we could use to advocate to say that domestic animals can have a negative impact on the biodiversity values that we're trying to protect, and maybe that should be the government should be looking at introducing cat containment areas in New South Wales, not dissimilar to what's happening in the ACT. So as a I guess this is leading the way to give us a platform to advocate for those sort of introduction of those sort of controls through state legislation.
Thank you so much. So through you, Mr. Mayor, if we could include an addition to, or actually probably after this particular motion, now that I think of it, to advocate to the state government for stronger.
We'll take that as a later.
Yeah. Rather than mess with this particular motion.
To you, Councillor McGrath, Mayor, and through you to the GM. I will be moving later on an alternative motion. Prior to that, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background as to why I wanted to provide that alternative motion. As you're aware, I'm a first-term councillor, and as us first-termers know, there is much to learn and much to read. Prior to this meeting, over the just 3 PDF documents, that's 370 pages. What I didn't expect as a first-termer is that we are being heavily scrutinised. People are watching us and our performance at council meetings. The feedback I've been getting today is as follows. Paraphrasing. There seems to be not a lot of debate at these council meetings. People are making the comment that motions tend to be just rubber stamped. people have silently used the word optics of this rather placid compliance that we are seemingly presenting as not generating much faith in us new councillors, or indeed the council at large. On Tuesday night, this late report, two of them, but the 200-273 DA was added at the last minute. It was already a packed agenda. In addition to 370 pages, if we had time to wade through them all, there was also a 1 hour presentation by the CRJO scheduled. As I listened to the report, I had to start to think that if this is such a seminal report, a sort of a watershed moment in biodiversity, then why haven't us new councillors been given the chance to go out to 2090 Sutton Road and have a look at this development, and also a community titled subdivision? Not sure what the word community means. It just seemed that, for me, bells were starting to ring, and that this was just being pushed through. At this point, I'll use as delicate a term as I can muster. I felt at that time rather corralled to approve this development application. Accordingly, I discussed an alternative motion with the General Manager. I guess when we have our briefing sessions on Tuesday night, they're not confidential, and he, with due diligence, spoke to the applicant, Mrs. Elizabeth Slapp. From her, I then received an email addressed to me, and as best I could tell, me alone. Not all councillors, just me. And it was a rather, dare I say, clipped email. So from my point of view, if this is I'm not at all questioning the stewardship of Kate and her staff, but if this is such an important, groundbreaking, cutting-edge, best practice piece of work, why am I not allowed to go out there and have a look on site? My conclusion after all of this is that I felt, and still do, rather coerced to pass this DA. I don't like that. Therefore, and in conclusion, I move my alternative motion that it be postponed for a month so that one may have the chance to go.
Sorry, Councillor Abbey, I think that's probably a direct negative. We've got a motion that's been moved and seconded, so I gather you're speaking against that motion that we're
Yes.
on the table here. So,
Mr Mayor.
Through Mr Mayor, it could be considered as a foreshadowed motion.
foreshadowing motion, yes.
So if the motion that's being moved and seconded is unsuccessful, then Councillor Abbey would have the floor to discuss the foreshadowing. No.
There is,
Why didn't you mention it earlier?
through
Pretty obvious.
You're right.
through you, Mr Mayor, to assist Councillor Abbey, there is a way, if you are determined that this lay on the table, you can put a procedural motion that this lay on the table. So is that a way forward for
Foreshadowed motion is basically saying.
same thing?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so, and the foreshadowed motion, we deal with this motion first.
Yes.
With the motion that's been put there, which is the recommendation on.
And if that's carried,
then the foreshadowed motion doesn't proceed.
that's right. You understand that, Councillor Abbey?
Not really.
Well,
So-
what happens is we've got a motion before us at the moment, that's being debated at the moment. You're foreshadowed an amendment.
Yep.
If this motion is carried, that your foreshadowed amendment just lapses. So it's all about numbers. Okay, further discussion.
No, question, Mr Mayor, does the foreshadowed motion need a second?
No.
Okay, thank you,
Through you,
Not
Mr.
at this point in time.
thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak on behalf of the recommendation. After receiving a report on Tuesday, I went out to Sutton yesterday I took quite a few photos, which I did forward to all councillors. I went and had a look at the site. I went and talked to locals. I introduced myself to people at the bakery. I met the lady who runs the art gallery, who was part of the community group who was against the original development. And I'd just like to say, like, the report was so comprehensive, and I felt like I had a lot of knowledge to go and speak to locals, and I found a lot of positive responses, particularly for the biodiversity and things that were happening. And I just want to note that the people who spoke against the development back in February 21, when I went through and I read all those documents of the letters that were written, and then I read the new document that's just come out, like from page 12 onwards, a lot of that stuff was answered. So it's come a long way over time. So for me, to go through the report and to look at what's happened from the past and then to look at where it's at now, to go out, see the site myself, and as I said, I know some of you guys are a bit busy. That was, we've only had a couple of days, but I did send through photos to all councillors so that you could see the site for yourself. I went and looked with my own eyes, just so I could get my head around what was happening, and I'm quite excited about this, and I just want to commend the planning team and everyone who's been involved in putting this together. I think it's amazing, so well done.
Any further speakers against the motion?
Not against the motion, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak against the motion. I'm supportive of what Councillor Abbey has put forward, and that is the late notice of this particular DA. And I think Mr Councillor Abbey has pointed out the uniqueness of this particular development, and I'm not suggesting that the work that has happened here is not admirable, and it's very thorough and it's detailed. What I'm arguing against is accepting a DA this late, and it's 21 pages, and I'm not really happy of getting that on Tuesday afternoon late, and then being asked to look at it and make a considered judgment about it. I think we need to put it in context about the amount of information that we're getting. Last week, I think we got, in regard to 6.11, we got 500 pages. And we're being asked to look at that thoroughly, maybe not discuss it today in full, but there are a few issues that I wouldn't mind bringing up there. And today we've got 300 pages as well. So we're looking at moving towards about 800 pages over the last week that we've got to become familiar with. And I consider this to be a deluge of information, and I'm just worried that are we getting on top of it? And after the deluge, are we going to make a good decision? So what's another 21 pages? Well, I think, as has been mentioned, it's an important development and it's been very thorough. And I think councillors, and we're fairly new, we've only been here 4 months or so, we need to be able to say, hey, let's just slow this one down a bit, let's have a go at it with a bit more consideration. And I take Councillor Abbey's point that, yeah, it would have been good to get out there and have a good discussion with people. Councillor Pothan has done that, which is admirable, but we haven't had the opportunity to do that because we had other commitments as well. I'm sort of really concerned about the other issue that legally we've been talked about as being directors of a company, directors of a board, and we have that sort of legal responsibility in regard to the decisions that we make. So we're not only accountable, but we're also responsible for council decision. And I don't think we can go back and say, well, really that decision, we weren't really on top of it because it was presented late. And we didn't really examine it in depth. I think we need to become a lot more assertive in basically saying, if the DA is important, we need time to have a good look at it, and if necessary, go out and basically see the situation, talk to the relevant people, and make sure the people who are opposing it get the chance to oppose it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I take all the points so far. However, I take issue with Councillor Cameron. If you just read the 21 pages, you wouldn't have got anywhere close to the full picture. There's 192 pages of supporting documentation And if he had read that, he would have discovered that most of the issues that have been brought forward have been answered. This is one of the best pieces of work I've seen done in a very long time, and I congratulate Kate. Great job, well done. With a bit of vision back to the future, 30 odd years ago when I was in this chamber, we looked at the planning proposals for Murrum Bateman based on lot topography rather than a grid pattern. And I'm delighted to see this back again in Sutton. It's a good concept and it's one to be supported. The fact that this is supported by the New South Wales government, all the work that has been done in this over 7 years, I believe every question has been answered. Yes, I'll correct you, there were actually 987 pages if you read everything in all the documentation. However, 500 of those are not important enough to, with due respect to the Director for Infrastructure, there was no dire necessity to read those pages right now. This is groundbreaking stuff. It is something that I commend to Council. I support Councillor Jones and I congratulate Councillor Puffin for going out and having a look. I'm very familiar with that part of the world. I see the baker every weekend. And I've spoken to most of the people in Sutton. This should be supported by Council. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I'd just like to I'll support the recommendation. I think it's great for Sutton to have this subdivision there, and Kate's done a great job of doing all this and all the biosecurity, everything's right. And one thing about the bloody cats, the cats, what about the red cats that's running around there killing birds everywhere? You forgot about them. You can't tie them up.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
But it's great for Sutton, I think. And the people I've talked to out there, no problems at all. And I've lived there all my life in Gundaroo and Sutton, around Sutton.
Any further speakers against?
Not against, I just would like to ask a question. And I really commend Councillor Cameron and Councillor Abbey for being newcomers and standing up. It's really difficult for us to be thrown all this documentation and read it very quickly, and I think that's the main point that they're trying to make, is that, you know, if this has been going on for such a long time and there's hundreds and hundreds of pages, why are we receiving it 48 hours to look at all of this? Why couldn't we have received this a week ago? Why was it a late edition? I'd just like to ask that question.
Well, through Mr Mayor, the reason it was late was that we were waiting on the ministerial documentation to come from the state government. Once we got that information, we have an obligation to present a report to you as soon as we practically can. It was possible to finish the report, albeit late, after the normal time frame for you to receive a report. Yes, you got it on Tuesday, but I mean, most of the report, the whole of the documentation was issued prior to the Easter long weekend. And I guess the expectation is usually that weekend period is when you do all your reading of everything. So this report coming in late, albeit late, if people had been managing their time, they would have actually been able to absorb the information within a 48 hour period. But everyone's different, I understand that. And certainly if councillors don't feel comfortable with making a decision, they're entitled to not vote for the motion that's been presented. They're entitled to seek a deferral if they need more time. So that's there's nothing wrong with that.
I suppose from my perspective, I do place a lot of trust in council in what their recommendation is, because they've done a lot more reading, and you know, that's not my industry. You know, I can't sit there and digest 900 pages of information. I'm not going to pretend that I can do that. So I do have to place some sort of trust, but I do echo what Councillor Abbey has said, and I think that little flags do go up when we get these reports coming and we have to urgently vote on it and we don't have enough time to sort of digest everything. So I just wanted to have that on record as well as a newcomer.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I empathise both with Councillor Abbey and Councillor Cameron, and I was indisposed at the time, and this is a very large report to try and digest, but being on council previously, I have already had the privilege of already seeing a lot of this documentation, and so I was a lot more familiar with it. Having said that, I do appreciate the urgency of this matter and the fact that we've been pushing our planning department to get these DAs through, not just this one, but DAs in particular, and this one has been going for 7 years. I think, to be honest with you, I think we should have the trust in our staff that this is an appropriate thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Mr.
Councillor
Mayor,
Jones, close the debate.
Look, it's a humbling thing when you realise a project has been in the wings and being planned for almost as long as I've been a councillor, and to see it finally raise its head right at the last minute. It's like, here it is, finally. Next level planning on biodiversity, fabulous to see. I want to see more of it. Having tried to use a very clunky tool in the past to try and protect superb parrots and use kind of e-blocks to try and do the job in Gundaroo. It was tough going. It was difficult to manoeuvre. To see this McDonald's version, accept your biodiversity through the window was wonderful in terms of a planning tool. I was like, wow, this is how it should be. Terrific to see. My fellow councillors who are new, I have a lot of empathy. For where you're at right now. This was the big one. This was our CSP, our budget, our long-term financial plan. You had to absorb so much, and I understand the stress that you're under. This is the role. Hitting the ground running is really tough when you've got those big documents in front of you. Thank you for doing the extra yards to go and see what you needed to see, to put your feet on the ground. And I appreciate that if we can, we will always try and get all our councillors out to see a site when it's possible. We are charged with a duty to process. If we don't, we're leaving ourselves exposed to having it taken out of our hands. And that is the problem that we're faced with. And we have to weigh up, did we get enough notice? I believe we did, and I commend the motion. Thank you.
Okay, we've all spoken, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? I declare the motion carried. Councillor Cameron and Councillor Abbey voted against it.
Just capture those.
Okay, the next item is the Walker Park grandstand. There's a recommendation.
I'd like to move the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Do we have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Reid. Any discussion? No, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare the motion carried. Six point one, New South Wales employment.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to leave the room.
Thank you, Councillor Potham.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Jones.
With item 6.1, I'd just like to check that we can ensure that the flexibility to allow dwellings in the, I believe it's the B2 zone, or all of the zones that we're now changing over to, is still an available option to us going forward. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, so in terms of the possibility of residential accommodation in the new zones, it'll be in the E1 local centre zone, residential accommodation in dwellings will be permissible with consent, but they would be prohibited in the E3 productivity support and the E4 general industrial zones, which I consider to be appropriate.
And just confirming that current residential addresses
won't be impacted if there were future development applications put in for those sites.
In terms of being able to be retained?
Yeah, for example, if somebody wanted to knock the house flat and rebuild a residential home there or extend there, they won't be impacted by the change of zones.
So in the E1 local centre zone, the uses will be permissible, so it would just be the lodgement of a development application. It's a little bit more complex. If you've got a legally established dwelling in what will be the E3 and the E4 zones, then you would need to rely on the existing use provisions in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act.
You more than likely would not be able to knock down the house and start again. It would be more about renovation and extension.
I'll move the recommendation as a motion.
Thank you, councillor Reid. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Turner. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? You're against, councillor
I'm
Young?
against that one, thank you. I don't like anybody who takes it.
What claim?
Perceived agreements.
Okay, we'll go on to 6.2, the planning proposal, Cusack Place. There is a recommendation. Someone wants to move the recommendation? Councillor Thurston? Councillor Reid, seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Cameron?
Thank you, Mayor McGrath. Yeah, I'd like to argue against the recommendation. I don't like this particular proposal. As soon as I see power lines and talking about suburban development, which that's what it looks like as a possibility, I get a bit nervous and a bit apprehensive. When I lived in Melbourne a number of years ago, I did see a lot of power lines out on the outer western suburbs and quite a number of different areas, and they didn't make much of an effort to put in suburbs underneath them. That was a few years ago, and maybe things have changed with 4 million people down there. So I don't really like the idea of power lines, particularly in regard to housing. And there's a lot of people who think that power lines cause problems of a physical and mental nature. I don't subscribe to that, but I don't think I want to live near power lines for whatever reason. I think they're not particularly good. I didn't see, maybe I didn't look closely enough, Councillor Turner, to all the information that was provided to us. I didn't really see where the power lines were and the easements for future developments of power lines. I'm now on the HumeLink committee, and they were talking about HumeLink, and I know it's a different situation and it's massive power, but they're talking about a 200 metre spread around the power lines, and in terms of where they decide where the power lines are going to go, they're talking about an easement on either side of 500 metres. So we're really looking with HumeLink, and I'm not saying that that's definitive for all power lines, but they're looking at 1.2 kilometres, trying to avoid any housing around it. So I think that I'm not very confident about this particular development. I'm sure there will be people who come on board and basically say it's only a gateway, but the gateway is to rezone this area from a possible 16 or 17 housing blocks or farm blocks or whatever to something like 300. And I think I'm not happy about that. So the gateway, you're really giving someone else the power to sort of change the zone, and I think, and then there's the possibility of building. If I remember right, a gateway is related to a gate, and when you have a gate, you can open it up, and once you open it up, anything can happen. I think the context that we should be looking at the moment is that we are having a lot of large-scale developments in Yass. We have North Yass with Yarra, which I think was greeted with some sort of excitement that here is a big development. Then we had Hamilton Rise, that's come on board fairly recently. And then we have Wellington Road developments as well, which to my mind seem to be creeping down towards the dam. So we've got three reasonably large developments occurring at the moment. So what we're sort of basically saying at the moment is that we're going to have some more, and this is in the township of Yass itself. I think we should be aware that people are starting, I think that the problem came with Hamilton Rise, and suddenly all those fences went up, and suddenly people were saying, what's happening there? And there's a whole lot of development. I know the DA has been in for a long time, but it wasn't activated, and I think people had forgotten about it, maybe not the planning people here, but people in the community had forgotten about it. And I think there's a bit of concern at the moment that maybe we're overreaching with development in Yass itself. I can remember a few years ago being in the back section here and listening to people saying how industrial turbines, wind farms, and solar panels were going to destroy Yass Valley. And some of those people are in the room today. Let me put it this way. I think what's happening with development at the moment is more insidious. I think it's changing the nature of Yass markedly, and I think we need to be aware of where we can say, I hate to use the expression, draw a red line. Draw a line where basically we're going to say, maybe we should be a bit more careful about how much development in Yass is occurring, because there's quite a lot at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I take it you're speaking against the recommendation. Any speakers for the Councillor Jones?
Well, we've heard something about red lines. I want to talk about green lines. The green line that Yass Valley Council has already decided upon, and it's called the Yass Valley Settlement Strategy. And we're expecting to get to 27,000 people by 2036, and the Yass Township itself to 20,000. Now, there's only one way we can do that, and that's to open up more residential land. So we need 2,715 extra blocks, and that's not going to be brown infill. That needs to be new greenfield sites. That's the only way it's going to happen. And this was identified as an investigation site as part of the settlement strategy. And it's great to see that being realised. And these people aren't developers, and they've decided to have a crack at it because we had the confidence to say, let's investigate that as part of our settlement strategy. And so we're on target to get there if we can keep encouraging developments like this.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is by way of a question to the General Manager. I understand Councillor Cameron's issue with the power lines, but the gateway decision, it will go through that process, will it not? It will look at the power lines and determine whether there should be an easement there or and other reasons as well.
Through Mr. Mayor, the easements are there. They're already in place. Basically, there are very strict controls around power lines and power easements to prevent development from occurring under those power lines. So they have to be separated. Now, the question is the separation large enough, and that will potentially come out through more detailed planning. So that's certainly an issue. Yes, it's being put forward to go through the first gate. The planning process has many gates to go through. So putting it on exhibition allows you to canvass the wider community comments in relation to the development. It's not the green light for it to definitely go ahead. It's a green light to go through the first paddock. When you get to the other side, there'll be another decision-making position that council needs to make. And based on whatever the community says, the council may turn around and reject it at that point. So you're not actually going right to the end to approve it at this stage. You're just going through the first gate of the first paddock. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, not for or against, but I just wanted to speak in regards to it, because I hadn't made up my mind on which way I'd like to vote on this yet. But I just wanted to say that I hear what everyone's saying, and I think for me, what I worry about is I don't know how quickly these things happen. So, you know, I understand this is just the gate now, but if it all gets passed, you know, then do we start to see houses in 12 months' time? I don't know how quickly things like this happen. So, and it's not clear to me that, so I need to always sort of be a bit conscious. So I just wanted it to be on record that I support development and I understand, you know, that we need to grow to that point. But in relation to this, item 6.2, I didn't really see any supporting documentation that refers to the social sustainability or the basics of the town when development of this size is being proposed. I understand that this item is only to rezone, however, if passed, like Councillor Cameron said, you know, development will likely happen. So it's good to raise these issues at this point. Recent discussions that I've had with local community members regarding separate developments but occurring in a similar time frame has really brought to my attention the need to not solely view developments independently, but to have consideration for what other developments are occurring close to or at the same time, and the potential burden that that places on a community, especially if social sustainability is not able to keep up at the same pace. So if the rezoning of Cusack Place goes ahead, I've just lost my little notes, it'll bring, in light to Hamilton Rise happening at a sort of similar time frame, we're looking at 3,000 new residents if we look at 4 people per household coming in a quite, you know, a quick time frame. So the questions that I really had was, you know, are our schools at a current level to cope with that influx of students right now? Are our medical and hospital systems able to cope with that amount of influx of people? That's just the questions that come to mind when I think of these types of things. And I didn't see any real reference to that, except for just refer to the strategic plan or refer to the, you know, the settlement strategy, which didn't really clarify to me how quickly we were moving to address these types of issues as well. That's all I had to say.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the market for residential development is driven by the market. So you won't go from 0 to 1,000 houses in one hit. It will be staged. Hamilton Rise was approved before I arrived here 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So
15 years. I think.
Yeah, so it's had a long period of going through a process to get to, you know, starting construction, and that project will go on over a number of years. So they don't all hit the market at one point. Developers don't work that way. They also like to drip feed the market because it actually helps sustain the value of the property of the future stages as well and protects them. So development does take a long period of time. One of the issues that we face in Yass Valley at the moment is that we've got a housing shortage, both of rental accommodation and new houses. We've got a growing population with people wanting to come here. There is a long period of time to get from greenfield to built suburb, and that takes a long period of time. So yeah, you need to plan well in advance of when development actually takes place. It's very unusual to see you go from 0 to hundreds of blocks of land in one hit. It doesn't usually happen that way.
I've seen it differently in Myra Bateman over the last 10 years of living there. So I can only base that on, you know, we've had maybe 4 developments that will come in the last 10 years. And I know they're not as big as these, but I suppose I base my thing on that, you know, that did happen quite quickly. So I don't know how quickly this can happen. So it's good to ask the questions and for you to answer them so that I understand.
Councillor Reid.
Sorry, asking a lot of questions here, but my understanding is if we decline this gateway proposal, that the developer can go for gateway anyway. Is that correct, gentlemen?
There is an avenue for them to seek a review of council's decision through the department.
Yep.
I'm not sure that many people have actually done that at this stage, but there is a mechanism there.
But the idea is for us to put it into the gateway situation so that we can go through these various stages of looking at the ecology, heritage and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If we decide to put this on hold as a result of power poles that go through, transmission lines that go through. And I do remind people that there's a movie about the serenity of power poles. There are some people who actually like it.
Name the movie.
We have a major problem in the fact that if we are trying to find 5,300 odd housing blocks, Yass, for better for worse, was picked by Essential Energy as the major switching station for power from the Snowy. The power comes to Yass, is sent to Sydney, it's sent to inland New South Wales, it is sent everywhere. I have 3 transmission lines across my property. I looked as though I was also going to have HumeLink, which can save the electricity bill because if you stand under a 500 kV line with a fluoro tube, it lights up. And the static electricity will make your fences hum. But it is very hard in the Yass district to find blocks that are not impinged by a transmission line somewhere along their length of their country. If we take out country that can be turned into smaller blocks close to town on the grounds that they are impinged by the electricity poles, we're making a rod for our back because we have to go broader field and fill in infill in agricultural land in order to do that, and that will make the town so big that you'll never be able to service it. Essential Energy is here to stay. The power is here to stay. We have to learn to live with it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to speak on recommendation of this one as well, and I totally respect Councillor Cameron's views and the concerns involved with large developments. I would also like to just bring to the table the other side of what developments bring to town, and looking at the settlement strategy of 2036 that Councillor Jones also brought back to the table. In respect to that, if you look at the numbers that are moving into the community and if there's concerns about schools and hospitals and things, as our numbers grow, so do our opportunities for grants, funding, and at the moment we sit in quite an awkward bucket as far as health services go. The minute we get a little bit bigger, we are actually in a different bucket where we are due for a lot more health services and a lot more things can come to town, whereas at the moment we don't quite have the numbers to tick those boxes. So when we're looking at a better hospital system and much better services, which at the moment people are driving to Canberra and Sydney and all that sort of stuff for, it's also looking at the job opportunities and the amount of people, particularly local people, who get employed through these developments. And it's also like housing families, as the General Manager spoke about the housing shortage that's here at the moment. So there is actually also a plus side. I know there's a lot of concerns for people about numbers, but if you're looking at growth and economics and new businesses coming to town and growth in schools and growth in our hospital and health services, I think it's a really good thing. And I'd just like to also say again that today we're actually not voting on the development, so obviously this will come back to the table, and that's when we can look at green spaces and areas around power lines. So we're not actually voting on any of that stuff today. It's just about putting it through the gateway. So I just wanted to bring that back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind the critical situation as far as housing is concerned across Yass Valley. I mean, you can't rent or buy a house at all anywhere at the moment, and that is right around the ACT. So if we don't have growth and development, rezoning, well, it just becomes worse and worse. I mean, we can have trouble getting staff because we can't provide housing for them. So, Councillor Reid.
Yes, I believe that since the mover of the motion has just spoken, that we now close the motion and vote on it.
Let's go. Thank you, Councillor Reid. We've got there to vote. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Councillor Cameron and Councillor Butler. Again. Okay, thank you. Councillors? 6.3, development consent, DA 200277. There's a recommendation.
I was thinking.
Councillor Burgess. We have a seconder, Councillor Reid. Any discussion? We do like a bit of debate, Councillor Burgess.
This fellow was developing this corner block way up Mark Tree Road, and they wanted him to do 600 metres of bitumen down on the end of the tail, which is miles from where his place is, and he's paid at 15,000. I think that's fine. Problem.
Prepared to vote? I'll put the motion.
Sorry, I
All
just
those-
have one
yes.
question, sorry.
Councillor Burke.
Stand up, please. If, it just says recommend, so if it is adopted, if no significant submissions are received, what is a significant submission, and if it is received, does it come back before council again to vote on that?
Through Mr Mayor, that's what happens. Basically, we'll get a range of different potentially a range of different types of decisions. So some people actually make a submission on the basis of there's a spelling error or something in the thing. So
Okay.
that's administrative in my mind. So there's no need to bring that back to council to fix up that. It's not a very effective use of your time. But if they're fundamentally opposed to the agreement, then that should come back for council deliberation. It's going to be a so the
I was just trying to
the
clarify
judgment.
what is
Yes,
significant and what
it's a judgment call, but generally speaking, if we might get a dozen submissions that say this is fantastic, why would we need to bring that back to council when they're not seeking any changes? So that's why we do that. There's a mandatory requirement under the planning legislation to put a planning agreement on public exhibition for a month. So that if we had to bring it back to council, it would be the next council meeting with the one after it, so it's about 3 months.
Thank you for the clarification.
Ready to vote? Sorry, Councillor.
No.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not opposing anything.
I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried.
Can I ask a question?
6.4,
No, it's not related to 6.4.
related to,
The comment that just was made by the general manager. Sorry, it's a bit there. Can I ask a question? We had an individual who wrote to us about the asset and management policy, and I think he's come back to us and basically said that he didn't receive any feedback on it, and the asset and management policy seems to have gone through without being referred back to council for consideration. He maintains, and I actually met him at the Riverbank Market on Sunday, and he maintains that he was making a substantial criticism of the asset and management policy, and it wasn't followed up, it wasn't brought to council, and therefore he was querying, does that happen all the time? Now, one of the other pieces that have come up today, we've got some people referring back that they've had some criticisms of the grant information, that the grants were only 12 months and should be longer, and they were published in the briefing papers. Now, this particular person says that hasn't happened with his criticism, and he hasn't had any feedback back. Can I get a comment on that, please? Because that goes back to.
I understand he has had feedback.
He has had feedback.
Yes.
In what sense? In what sense?
He was an email. He got an email response from council staff.
What in detail? It wasn't just an automatic response.
No, not an acknowledgement. It was a response.
All right.
If it's the same person that I understand, I've seen a response, a detailed response.
I think there was another email on the last Friday that was basically inferring that he didn't get a response. So.
Well, the responses. There has been a response.
Okay.
If it's the same person.
Yeah, I think so. Luke.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, his argument is that he gave feedback in the exhibition period and it wasn't taken into consideration by council. And he felt it was quite substantial. And my looking at it would have come to the same thing. It wasn't spelling and grammar. It was more than
My understanding is that the submission was made.
Yeah.
A response was made
right.
to the person
Right.
on behalf of council. And it wasn't considered significant in terms of what was put on exhibition and what asset management planning is.
Okay, thank you.
Again, all the documents are going on exhibition, well, subject to this evening's decision. There'll be further exhibition of a range of documents.
Like in 611.
In the
Yeah.
611. Sorry, yes.
So a person could again make another comment about the asset management policy.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're on 6.4. Montessori preschool. Where's the recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to move the recommendation to continue with the footpath as planned in front of the proposed development.
Thank you, councillor Jones. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Cameron?
I just wanted to acknowledge the submission made by the Montessori group. I actually commend their idea of a bridge over Chinaman's Creek, which might lead to further parking that they can access. But I think the priority should be on the footpath at the front of the proposed preschool, based on their submission that they would encourage their families to walk to the location.
Thank you, councillor Jones. Any speakers against the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. 6.5. 5 Mickelon Close, Wee Jasper. Someone like to move the recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we have a pick a box options. I'd like to propose we go for the option of deferment, which allows the proponent to reconsider the size of their deck without incurring another development lodgement fee, as I understand it. So thank you for your generosity in that, because I know that they've been made aware and quite clear of the constraints.
Do we have a seconder before?
I think we did.
Rude.
Sorry, I thought we had a seconder. If I can just get some clarity and transparency on what are the restrictions on decks? What would make it too big, which is what the recommendation is saying. This is overkill for the site.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of this particular development site, so the report refers to the fact that there is a setback policy for this particular zone, but in this case it can't be applied to this development. So we've taken a merit-based approach for the assessment of the application. And in considering that the aspects of the development and the submission that we have received, that we feel that the dwellings on this side of Mickelon Close are more or less in line. We acknowledge on the southern side of Mickelon Close that is not the case. However, we feel that if you allow the deck to be constructed in its current format, that essentially you're bringing forward that particular development, to almost, I think it's 3 metres from the front boundary. We feel that it's out of scale with the development that's in that street. It's a visual impact and it's a streetscape issue. So it is very much a merit-based approach for this particular development application.
True, Mr. Mayor, it's also a steeply sloping side as well, so that exaggerates the height.
Councillor Turner.
If I can ask a question, please, Mr. Mayor, of the planner. When's a deck not a deck?
When is
This says the dwelling roof design will extend over the proposed deck area. I don't believe that's a deck, that's an addition to the building.
We have,
Deck is an open space in my language.
look, we refer to as dwelling additions as a new, and then in brackets, a new deck. Like it is additions, it's a deck, it's yeah.
It's not a deck, it's got a roof on it.
This becomes a roofed veranda. This is the same
That's what I
situation.
want decks to get sun and fresh air and bits and pieces.
Some
They
decks
don't
have
put-
louvers though, like we've got louvers now, so you get sun.
But thank you.
When it's a deck, not a deck. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further speakers?
I would like to speak, please, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I read the submissions before I read what the recommendation was. And I was really perplexed reading the recommendation for this agenda item after reading the response from council to the submission that it received. The response to the submission seemed very supportive of the DA and addressed all the issues that the submission had raised. And I agreed with the council's response and I thought it was really great. And then I read the recommendation and it was it wasn't the same, it just didn't correlate to me. So I just was, perplexed by that. Just wanted to make note.
Okay, we have a motion to defer. Any further speakers for or against the motion?
Is there another motion not to defer? Sorry, we were talking about other motions being put forward. Is this the only one now on the table that we're
It's
deferring?
the only one, yes, unless you want to move foreshadow something.
The allowance,
Further discussion.
So I,
through you, Mr Mayor, the three options are approve as recommended,
yes,
refuse, or sorry,
Approve,
Yeah.
refuse and
refuse, approve or defer.
Yeah.
They're the three
that's
options.
on the table right now.
No,
Right.
what's on the table right now is the motion there, which is to defer.
So can we put the other one on the table?
Through Mr
No,
Mayor,
no.
Okay.
options available to her, to Councillor Butler could include amending my motion, which I'm happy to do if I agree with it. Is there anything you'd like to do to my motion?
Through
I'm
Mr
sorry, I'm
Mayor,
confused, that just happened quite
Yeah, okay.
quickly, and from the emails that we received, I thought that we were gonna have those three options on the table
Well-
immediately, I just wasn't
No.
following procedure.
You can't have-
Apologies.
through you, Mr Mayor, you cannot have three different options in one motion.
Okay,
Okay, so you select one of the options.
but there was only one.
Councillor Jones has selected the option to defer, so that's the motion on the books at the moment. Now, the options that you have right now are that if this motion fails, you could through the debate, you could actually foreshadow an alternate motion or one of the other options. So you have that right to do that at this point in time.
Okay,
If the motion, of course, is successful, then your foreshadowed motion doesn't go anywhere, it just falls over.
okay. So can I just ask a question? How would we have got that on the table before the deferment was on there?
Through you, Mr Mayor, by getting to your feet quickly.
Okay. Now I understand, thank you, I will do that.
And you jump in before her.
Yeah, see, she's
So
a
you'll be
seasoned
pretty
pro.
quick,
correct.
Mhm.
Now
Okay,
you're learning.
there you go, live and you learn.
Runners on.
Could I just ask if councillor Butler wants to foreshadow a motion? Does she feel that this should be agreed to or?
I would like to deal with this now, I
No,
don't.
no,
Yeah,
sorry.
What's your option? Sorry.
That we approve with the conditional development,
Consent.
thank you, consent.
So you're moving that, you're foreshadowing that.
Sure, I am, yes.
Any further speakers for or against the deferral motion? Okay, prepared to vote?
Yeah.
Those in favour of deferral? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay,
Those against.
those against? 2. Councillor Butler and Councillor Reid against. Okay, so it's deferred. What happens now? It's deferred for,
Basically,
Done it
you've
again,
deferred it, as Director of Planning mentioned, is we go back to the applicant and talk to them and negotiate with them about an alternate, and it comes back to council with that, and how successful it is or otherwise.
everyone happy with that? Okay. Story said 6 storage shed, Red Hill Road, Bounty.
So move, Mr Mayor.
Moved councillor Turner, seconded councillor Burgess. Any discussion? Not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare the motion carried. 6-7, Craig Mill Precinct.
Through you, Mr Mayor, happy to move the motion as says.
Councillor Jones, do we have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll say.
Councillor Reid?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's not often we get to spend $1.2 million.
I'd be very confident.
I love this part of the job. Look, this is an exciting generational change for Yass to have this part of our town opened up, to celebrate our heritage. This is the place where people brought their wheat to grind so they could survive and create this amazing town that we get to live in. And to open up that part of Yass and get us to the next step of the process is an important one. And these things take so much more time than you think they will. And when you get to the next hurdle, it's really exciting. And I love getting to the next step. It may be, the next council that takes on the baton. I'm hoping that we get some shovels out during our term here and get started on this project, if we're so blessed. But every step forward is a step that we're building on from previous councils. Actually getting the land, all the strategic purchases that were made, is something that previous councils have had to do and keep and hold and be questioned as to why you're doing it. But there was vision back then to know that we would need it. We would need to grow and we would need to provide for our staff and for our community. And to know that books have been stored in the bathroom at the current supper room, Yass Valley Library, it's a sad thing. We should have a great facility for our community, for our mums and dads to take their kids, to introduce them to books and learning and wonderful opportunities. When I first came to Yass almost 11 years ago, I went looking for the library as a new resident. That was one of the first things I wanted to do. That's where you start as building a community as a young mum with a couple of kids. And I walked straight past it and ended up at the toilet. So I thought, where's the library? And so I backtracked and found a beautiful green door, which was a little bit like walking down Diagon Alley, except for the fact that there were a few beer bottles as well in that very dark alleyway. But what I did find was incredible staff inside and a wonderful program. But I have lived in other places with whiz-bang libraries that could run amazing programs that run rings around us currently because we just don't have the facilities. So I'm really excited to see $1.2 million from our infrastructure budget set aside for this. It's a big decision. It's half our infrastructure budget. So I don't do it lightly, but I do it excitedly.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Any further speakers for or against the motion? Councillor Reid?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I wouldn't like to see this project stopped or cease or go on hold at all. We can't afford to stop now. We've just got to keep going.
Okay, I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Thank you, councillors. 6-8, Yass water treatment plant. Recommendation is the report be noted. Someone like to move recommendation? Councillor Reid, Councillor Potham.
Through Mr Mayor, a question. It appears Treasury being a little bit stubborn about letting go of the money. Is that the case?
So Treasury, through Mr Mayor, so Treasury have signed the deed. So we actually have the deed signed, which is good. I spent an hour on the phone with them this afternoon, getting access to the portal and making sure that we're right to go. So the money has been released. We'll submit our first, given we've done a bit of advanced work that we've paid for this one, we'll submit our first request for reimbursement after the 1st of May, and that should be with us by the end of May. So the project is ongoing and funded.
Very good, thanks. Put that motion, did I?
No.
Oh, we're gonna vote on it.
Okay, all those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. The investment and borrowings report. Recommendation is the report be noted. Thank you, councillor Kern. Councillor Reid. Question?
Yeah, a question, a question through you, Mr Mayor. Implications of the increase in the CPI, would you like to make a comment how that's going to affect our loan situation and our borrowing situation and our investments, I meant to say.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd be more interested to talk about the implications it's going to have on the increased interest rates. And that it will be good for our investments, but it will make life difficult for borrowings and expenses and everything else. The CPI is causing all sorts of havoc, and as we'll talk about shortly in the budget, it's we're not keeping up.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Rate arrears. There's a recommendation. Someone like to move it? Councillor Reid, Councillor Abbey. Any discussion? Any questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Draft integrated planning and reporting documents, public exhibition.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I have a motion to put on the screen. Firstly, that the draft 22-23 operational plan, actually I'm just going to say the suite of draft integrated planning and reporting documents, I'll just summarise how I do that, be placed on public exhibition for public comment, as point number one. Point number two, that following the public exhibition, consideration be given to amending the 22-23 operational plan to provide for utilising unallocated funds from the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program grant from the Unexpected Grants Reserve for the preparation of plans and documentation for the Yass Soldiers Memorial Pool renovation and heated pool. It does say pools, but I think at this point we'll just say priority work at the Yass Soldiers Memorial Hall as well. And three, that the application for a permanent additional special rate variation to the of 1% to the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal be approved.
Yeah, that's the next one we can take. Through you, Mr Mayor, that just to explain the explanation of that additional special rate variation, it's a stopgap measure to recognise that the rate cap that was announced this year was lower than the vast majority of councils in New South Wales have forecasted in their long-term financial plans. We forecast around 2.4-2.5% for rate cap, and it was certainly well below that. So that's an initiative of the Minister for Local Government to provide basically a fast track for councils to get back on track with their long-term financial plans.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, councillor Towns. It's been moved by councillor Jones, seconded councillor Towns. Councillor Jones.
If I can speak to the motion. Firstly, I just want to thank staff for the amount of work that's gone into such a large suite of documents, and it was absolutely terrific to have our department managers in the room that full. It's the first time I've ever seen that done, and it was great to hear them talk about their particular budgets or projects. I would also like to bring attention to the fact that I've included some items there that I know our community wants to hear from us on, and it would be remiss of us not to talk about them as part of the upcoming budget. So this is a way that allows us to go for the rate increase of 1% and get these documents out there unchanged, but also putting our community on notice that we are looking at the Memorial Hall and it is important, and that we are looking at all the work that's been done previously by the pool and heated pool working group led by Ross Webster that delivered some very clear messages to us about what the community wanted in that area. And so it's been a long time coming, and in fact to see the Crago Mill precinct at a more advanced stage might be making some people scratch their heads about, well, what about all the work that was done on the heated pool project and the refurbishment project. But it has not been ignored. We're capturing that in this budget to consider in June. So we'll get a chance to really dig deep on those and have a look at those plans and projects and refresh older councillors and introduce those projects in detail to new councillors. I'd also like to ask a question on the forecasted deficit. We were looking at about $500,000 as I understand it, but with the third grading crew now in the mix, does that bring us up to around 800? Through you, Mr. Mayor, can I ask the General Manager about that? Or Director Safranek, sorry.
So we haven't discussed an additional grading crew as part of the budget. There are some critical roles that we are looking at during the exhibition period, putting those back in that were taken out, let's just say, with an understanding the staff were trying to balance the budget rather than looking at critical roles. So we might be looking at about 300,000 back into the budget for that. But we actually haven't talked about an additional grading crew.
So currently, just so I've got clarity, we're putting this out for the public exhibition that currently has, when people look at it, about 800K deficit. Okay, thank you.
Speakers against the motion?
Sorry, it's not a question, I'm not speaking against the motion, I'd just like a qualification if I could.
Yes, Councillor.
Clarification. In terms of putting the money into the preparation of plans and documentation for the pool, are we committing council to going ahead with the pool? Or are we saying this is what we want and we might go out to private enterprise or whatever to build this?
Consideration, I think, is the key word. Motion.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's not a commitment to build anything at this point in time. It's, as we keep saying, it's about being shovel ready in some respects to do that. Whether a portion of that money goes towards preparing plans and documentation, it actually might be, an alternate approach might be to go out for expression of interest for a design and construct model of delivery for that. That way you don't have to prepare the plans are prepared as part of the expression of interest process. So that can be fine-tuned on as part of the consideration of the final documentation in June.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask a couple of questions about staffing, please? Is that possible?
You can ask them, but we just might have to be careful about.
Yeah, I know operational and policy and that sort of. One of the things that's going to happen is you've got quite a good idea of going out to the villages and talking to people about these this suite of documents, all 500 pages. I'm sure everyone's going to have a good read of those. One of the things that stands out for me is that we've got there a cultural change manager, and I'm sure there's going to be some discussion about what is a cultural change manager and why do we need a cultural change manager? And that raises the question, is there a problem with culture within the organisation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer that question. The cultural manager is a cultural/project manager. We have some large projects that council is currently undertaking. We are migrating our IT management system to the cloud. We are introducing a whole new WHS system And we are calling it a cultural/project manager because all of those will affect the culture of the staff. So we want to make sure that we continue to have a positive and effect on staff and not a negative one. So that's why it's been called that.
Okay, so it's
It's more a project manager.
more a project manager with the IT stuff.
No, IT, WHS, like workers' health and safety, and overall.
Is this going to be a difficult position to fill? In the sense that it's quite a demanding sort of job description.
It's a special field, yeah.
Yeah, well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think specialist skills these days are very difficult to recruit, but you won't know until you go to the marketplace. So, we're confident enough that there is enough exciting projects that are happening in Yass Valley that is an attractive place for people to come to work. But we've still got to go to the marketplace to see what sort of people are likely to put themselves forward as a candidate. And certainly my view is that our approach as an executive management team is to make sure that we get a good fit for the organisation.
Okay, the other question I'm asking is that it looked like, just having a look at the figures, that there might have been a bit of a staffing, in regard to staffing. In February, I think it was pointed out that we were going for about 12.8 million in regard to staffing, and the forecast has gone a bit higher than that at 14.9 million. So have we got a blowout in terms of the cost of staffing?
So council is at a stage where we are expanding, and we have over the last 12 months increased some of the positions, and as in an as need basis, and hence moving forward with the additional positions that we are putting forward, there will be an increase in wages, yes.
Okay, now this is a question as a new councillor. There's a number of positions being created by the look of it. Does that have to come back to council for agreement, or what's the situation?
The manager is responsible for staffing.
So if you're changing the staffing, that's your job? Correct, okay. What about changing the structure of the organisation? Because I believe that we have to, 12 months after an election, the structure has to be looked at and possibly changed. Is that up for consideration at some stage?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a statutory requirement under the Act for the new council to, in its first 12 months, I think it is, to actually reconsider the structure of the organisation. So I'll need to bring a report to council to allow that discussion to take place.
Be considered.
Yeah.
So that could mean there could be some changes.
Look, it could be. There could be some changes. The council's always got that. I'll certainly make my recommendation about what I think should happen in terms of the structure of the organisation, because any change to the structure of the organisation may have some consequential operational issues in terms of staff positions, budgets, and the like. I mean, so when council considers the structure, it basically considers the senior management team and what each directorate is largely responsible for. So, if it's the planning directorate, we know that they're responsible for strategic planning, development assessment, compliance, noxious weeds, and the like. But there's not the positions within there. So that's
that's coming along at some stage.
Yes.
Okay, but not before the end of the financial year.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to put on the public record that what we're voting for today is just to put these documents on public exhibition. So even as councillors, we still have a lot of time to comment and put in submissions and talk to the community and things before this. And this is coming back to council to be adopted in June. So today's vote is just to put them on public exhibition. So the rest of us sort of aren't saying much at the moment, but we do have a lot of time to come back and comment about these things and welcome anything from the public as well to be part of the decisions and to jump in. And even like, you know, if you want a bit of a summary, I know I've done a lot of reading, most of the councillors here, so I guess we're here to support the community in talking about what these documents represent. So, yeah, thank you.
Mr Mayor, if I could just make one more comment, in regarding Councillor Cameron's comment, just when we go out to the public for the community engagement, we're providing them with a summary.
Yeah.
So we will give them links to the documents, but we're not expecting them to read like the whole, to know everything. We're giving them the high level summary to help them in digesting the documents.
Thank you for that. I think that's a really good idea. Are we going to get, like if we have a meeting out at say Gundaroo and they're making a number of points, are we getting a summary of that meeting, like for all the meetings?
Yes. At the June report will include all of those.
Okay, thank you.
Through Mr Mayor, we're also encouraging councillors to attend those
Oh,
meetings.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, to you, Lynette, when you mentioned about the high level summary, I presume it's actually in paper?
Yes.
You're handing out.
It's a presentation and we will hand out the presentation.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Happy to vote?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just one final comment, if I can close the debate. When we put this out, when we communicate to the public, I would sincerely hope, and I'm sure that our communications team will stress, about the extremely low rate peg of this year, because it's not every day that I put forward a motion to raise rates. So I just wanted to point out that that this will only be bringing us up to 2.3%, which is well below current CPI. And the additional funds is approximately $118,000. So we can do some basic community projects in our first year, correct? And that we're looking at $7 to $31 per annum in terms of increase in rates, which is not keeping track with CPI. So I just wanted to stress that when we go out, we really need to communicate, because sitting up front is the words, you know, rate variation. So I just wanted to make sure we communicate strongly that we need this to do the things that you want us to do in the community.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Six 12, financial assistance grants and donations policy. Is a recommendation?
Recommendations.
Moved, seconded, moved councillor Turner, seconded councillor Reid. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. Through to the General Manager. When will these community grants start? Are they, I thought they were due early, like March, April, but obviously we've been delayed.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, they're basically scheduled for, we're going to finalise the policy. That's the first step in the process. Then we advertise for submissions to come in from the community, but they basically would take effect from the new financial year. Thank you.
We're on 6.12, are we?
Yep.
Okay, question, sorry, Mr Mayor. Just a question, we got some feedback there that people were looking for a longer period than a year in regard to the provision of grants. I think there was some suggestion that this would help in planning. Should we give that some consideration? Because this is the feedback from the from consultation, and people are wanting a little bit more time to manage that financial situation.
It was considered, yes. Staff believe that it is more efficient to do it on an annual basis. This should not be the basis of an organisation's income. And it's every year the reasons that they use it may change. The application that they will complete to receive these funds will actually need to, one of the key components is how does this benefit the community? And that may change from year to year. So staff are happy to process this on an annual basis.
Through Mr Mayor, the other thing too to remember, if you give a community organisation grant money for multiple years, you've actually excluded other new groups that might come along from accessing that pool of money. So it does create a little bit more equity for changes in communities, and as a growing community, we would expect there to be new organisations popping up to serve different needs in the community in the future. So.
Thank you.
I'm happy to support the motion, but I do want to speak to the issue that Councillor Cameron has raised because it's an important one. Because it is great that new organisations get the opportunity to get a funding boost. But the elephant in the room is that a small group of country people in places like Gundaroo have the role of maintaining the community hall for the benefit of many groups. So if we so choose, we should be looking in our budget for the opportunity to fund specific things for them. If they are continuously applying and we are their only source for that, we have to make a decision. Do we accept that we're their only source and actually put them into the budget, creating an opportunity for other groups to look at the community funds? Or do we say, that's tough luck, you get 4 years or 5 years and then you've got to go and find your own source after that, because there's only so many years, I believe, that you can actually apply before you then drop off the list. So just to give you a bit of early sight on that, this is an issue in every village, that it's the same group of people trying to run as volunteers our community halls. So have a think about that before we head into budget.
Mr Mayor, Gundaroo was probably the poorest example you could have used.
Okay, yes, probably.
Unfortunately, that's run by the community, and the community, they have the ability to raise funds through their user fees for other community groups to use that facility. But yes, there are some halls that are managed by council, so it's a bit different.
Okay, any further questions? Happy to vote? I'll put the motion, all those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Policy review signs as a remote supervision and public liability policy. There is a recommendation. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Reid, Councillor Abbey, any questions? Any discussion? I'll put the motion, all those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Disclosure by designated persons. Recommendation be noted. Councillor Turner, Councillor Potham, no discussion. Put the motion, all those in favour, those against, declare it carried. 6:15 advocacy paper for funding priorities.
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I could.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, if I could just move us into a committee of the whole so we can rumble on what the motion should be and discuss the items in the advocacy paper, that'd be great.
Do we have a seconder?
So we can stay seated while we talk.
Any discussion? I'll put the motion, all those in favour, those against, declare it carried.
Just to remind councillors, you don't have to stand when you're in committee of the whole.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm proposing that we start with one dot point, which says that the advocacy paper for funding priorities in Yass Valley be endorsed for the purpose of advocacy to candidates in the upcoming elections. So we've got two coming up. We've got federal this year and state next year. So let's just hope the wallets are fat for us. And in two, I have proposed a starting list of a good dozen following projects being considered as the highest priority, but I have numbered the rest, and I'm open to any shuffling of the deck if you see a higher priority for you.
We'll just scroll up, Cherie, if we can.
I think we may have cracked $1 billion in terms of Santa Claus list.
Just scroll back down a bit. the first one probably should have that, the advocacy papers of funding priorities in Yass Valley be endorsed for the purpose of advocacy, and I think there's a minor amendment to that, Sheree, just a bit further up. So we add a minor amendment to include South Street. Basically, South Street Macintosh Circuit is a loop road. So not to avoid any confusion, I think adding South Street would be appropriate for that. So that should be included in the first part. And then I think the second part of the motion that Councillor Jones is putting forward is to highlight the shopping list with the highest priority projects for advocacy. So, Councillor Jones, you might want to take us through those priorities.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Priority one, in terms of who holds the purse strings, I put down stages 2 and 3 because I believe the federal government can walk and chew gum at the same time in terms of delivering this. And we need to get our workers home safe. It was a reminder to me when I met with the PC president of Yass High School yesterday, who lost family members on the Barton Highway. And it was a stark reminder to me that we should be advocating for this. 57% of our workforce go across the border every single day, and we want to make sure they come home safe. We also want to make sure that our tourists to our region and transporters get to where they need to go safely as well. We should be looking after our most vulnerable in the community, and it's been a stark reminder over the last couple of months from December when our hospital was closed down, mostly without community's knowledge in terms of its ward and only its ER running. And infrastructure is important. We had a funding commitment from federal Labor for a maternity ward for $4.7 million. Well, attaching that to an old, outdated hospital, what's really the point? We really do need to look to the future, and our population is, expected to grow 27,000 by 2036. So planning needs to start now for a new Yass hospital with maternity. Clean drinking water. It's a vital thing for our community, and all the reports tell us that we should be doing more than the $2 million that's been set aside so far for us. So we need a commitment, and I think it would be more than reasonable to expect the federal government to pitch in for a third of the cost, and the state government a third, and our own rate case a third for the upgrade of the Yass water treatment plant. It's what we did with the Murray Bateman pipeline, and that was a great project. It was delivered on reasonably on time, almost on time, with very little blowout. The retention and a retention commitment to keeping Yass Centrelink and Medicare. It was news to me this week to find out that the office that the federal government leases has not been renewed, and with less than 12 months to go. That makes me very concerned about the possibility that we could be losing our Centrelink and our Medicare office in Yass, and that's unacceptable. So I think we need to get a commitment from the federal government that that will be retained in Yass. Support for local government climate response. It's a sensible decision. We've all seen the impacts on our roads. We've seen the impacts with floods. We need forward thinking about what we're going to do, and funds are going to be needed for us to actually implement them. So a commitment from $300 million from the federal government for local government to do what our community wants us to do in terms of climate response. The growth in Murray Bateman needs to be acknowledged, and we've already had a federal Labor government promise, I think it was $750,000, wasn't it? Councillor Butler. And I'd like to see that advocated to all candidates. And let's not forget the infrastructure that we already have, and with the centenary coming up, I think it's very prominent in our minds. I think it's an Anzac Day just passed. We really need to step in very soon to save this building before it becomes a bigger project than we anticipated. And so funds will be needed for the roof and for the rest of the flooring issues, and to actually bring this building into a useful state for our community going forward. The vision that we've seen in the Crago Mill precinct development is generational change. This is going to set our community up for at least the next 50 years in terms of buildings that they can use and sites where we can have festivals and cultural activities and actually have a building where our staff can be retained in. We have to remember that we're competing with public service positions 50 kilometres down the road, and we want to retain our staff so that they think, well, that might be so, it might be a high pay grade, but I want to live and work in my community, and having a decent office space is part of that. And being able to house them. At the moment we've got staff on rotation on desks, and that's not ideal. And we're not even anticipating what we're growing with that kind of, if we do nothing, if we don't move out of this building. The Yass Soldiers Memorial Pool renovation and heated pool. Our community raised the money for that pool, that Olympic pool, and our community has had the benefit of that for many, many years. And it's time that we spent the money to upgrade it so we can have continued use. I know people that come from Canberra to use this pool because they love the ambience of Yass Pool. And the sight of Canberra number plates in Yass Pool, it's astounded me, but they said they come to do laps and they travel around to a lot of different pools. They really enjoy Yass Pool. I was actually doing laps with someone and they stopped and we had an amazing chat. But what we need to acknowledge is the work that's already been done by our community, particularly on the heated pool. This is so needed. We've got the state government trying to do what it can in terms of providing first lap vouchers, but there are kids that haven't had proper swimming lessons in 2 years because of COVID, and we have such a small swimming season. We have rivers, we have dams, we have to do everything we can to make sure our young ones know how to swim, and the only way to do that is close to or all year round swimming. We have sporting groups that would benefit from this. We have our elderly who would benefit from this kind of low impact exercise. We've got people recovering from injuries and surgery that all could benefit from this, including those doing physiotherapy. Number 10, our Yass Main Street upgrade. I know this is something that our Mayor is very passionate about, and I back him 150% on upgrading and improving the appearance of our street and the functionality of our street too. It's long overdue. And the next two items are certainly ones that I think with the Federal Highway Junction would speak to a federal budget, so I thought that really should go in there at number 11 and number 12 too. So that's the top 12. I have numbered more, but I'm happy for anyone to shuffle the deck here if you've got other items that you want to see lifted into the 12.
Can I just
So happy.
make a comment with the first item there, where it says stages 2 or 3. My understanding was that stage 2 had already been funded.
No.
It's been funded for design, it's not been funded for construction. And stage 3 hasn't been funded for design yet, but more construction. So I think keeping the pressure on allows us to pursue what we've been doing for decades in terms of getting duplication. But I think what makes it more important for those two particular stages to come on stream is the fact that we've now got the school being built, and if we continue to have that level of traffic flowing through Murray Bateman every day, that's I think it's going to compromise the safety of the school students, and I think it's also going to continue to affect the accessibility to to that Fairley area, with buses queuing to get in and out. So I think it's important that we try and accelerate the bypass so that we can then return the current highway back to a local road.
Councillor Cameron.
I just want to say that the initial work done by the staff was great, that we identified a whole lot of ideas, but it came to me that I saw a Queanbeyan Palarang had put out a top 10 and underneath it others, and I thought, it's not a bad idea to sort of try and sort of say, well, what's really important, what are we going to go after? And that got publicity in the Riot Act online, and I think that's the sort of thing we, we could easily sort of say to the Yass Valley Times, I might have to leave the room, that this is a priority that came up from council. What do you think? Because we do have another year for the state election. So I think it's a really good idea to try and sort of narrow it down a little bit and try and sort of be able to focus to our local members. Interesting, Riverbank Park had three major candidates there, ALP, Liberal and Jim Molan as well, and the Greens candidate, Vivian Harris, which I just mentioned. So we had three people there that if we had had something like this, we could have really hit them with, what do you think about this? Anyway, I'm sure there will be other opportunities in the next 3 weeks as they come around to pre-polling.
I've got a comment back. Whilst I agree with both speakers, I think we might be in danger. I mean, if we just had a discretionary fund that we could pick from, then yes, we could start prioritising things in a 1, 2, 3. But I'm thinking there are groups of issues or that might, for instance, the roads, right? We can get road funding, whereas we may not be able to get funding for, say, the swimming pool. So we might be a bit too constrictive if we simply just say our priorities are 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. I'm thinking we probably really need to group them into groups that we're more likely to receive funding for in a specific way.
Any suggestions on how we might do that, Councillor Root?
No.
An honest man.
Give me a few days to think about it.
To you, Mr. Mayor. If I could just, sorry, have it. So just in response to Councillor Reid's question, we are adopting the priorities in part 1. So the paper, which groups them into general, roads and community infrastructure. And in addition to that, we're creating a priority list, which is kind of like a shopping list. So you've at least got a dozen to wave in their face, because it is a big document when we look at all the possible, if there's a change in government, we don't, we can't crystal ball what they'll focus on.
Yep.
But this at least gives us a good pool to go, okay, well, it might be this and that, and we can be flexible as we move towards the state election with this document too.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the idea of the advocacy paper was certainly to get the whole lot out there to all of the candidates that as they come forward. But I think the idea here is, as Councillor Cameron mentioned, is picking up on the Queanbeyan idea and say, okay, well there is some ones that are on top of our list and there's everything else as well. But it just helps them give a little bit of focus to things that we think are really important for our community. So I think we've got the best of both worlds if we use both the advocacy document as a whole as well as our top 10, 12 priorities.
Okay, fine.
The essential difference between the list that Queanbeyan and Pallarang have put out is that they've got dollar signs in front of everything. We're a bit open-ended, really, huh?
We do have some dollar amounts that staff do have that we can add to it, so we could ask staff to add.
An approximate.
10 million alongside Craigo Mill.
And the rest.
32?
Councillor Turner.
I think there's a I won't say glaring omission in number 2. Wonderful to have a new Yass hospital, but it's absolutely useless if we don't have full-time medical attention. So I think if you're going to do new Yass hospital, there should be with full-time medical attention, maternity planning and infrastructure.
There was an announcement today up in North Queensland of some change that meant that they could get some sort of Medicare cover, which would help to get doctors into the area. I don't know whether that's.
I don't want to get my helicopter every time I have an accident, that's all.
But there seems
Golf buggy instead.
seems to be some criteria that has an impact on our ability to.
Councillor Turner, that's a valued addition. We've seen over the last 2-3 months our staff fighting for better ratios.
Yeah.
And we've seen firsthand that our hospital has been staffed by one single paramedic. It's the only option.
Okay, any further discussion? Anyone want to change the list around? Or add to it? Expand it in any way?
Can I just see the motion again, because I
Yes.
Sorry, so the first part of the motion is for the advocacy paper, that's the complete package.
Right.
Be endorsed for the upcoming election with that minor amendment to recognise that South Street and Macintosh Circuit are virtually the one loop. The next part is 12 of those, all of those in the document. There's 12 there that we consider to be a higher priority at this point in time. That may change down the track, but that's the suggestion tonight.
Right, thank you.
And can it be taken as given that staff will add the dollar signs for us, for the ones that, you know,
Adventure Playground, 750,000. Royal Hall,
snow.
sorry. So Memorial Hall,
4.5 million?
Urgent Works 1.2. And upgrade takes us up to about 5, so it's that another 4.
Yeah.
So Urgent Works at 1.2 and then upgrade at 5 million.
1.2
Urgent.
Urgent Works.
5, not 1.55. Upgrade. Go Mill, just put in the business case, 30 million total. Pool, Main Street, haven't done the planning, and the last ones I haven't done the full planning. So I don't have prices.
We've got a few dollar signs there.
Yeah,
I think
that's a bit more professional.
I move that we come out of committee of the whole. So we debate on this.
I think we've saturated the discussion. Yes, thank you, Councillor Turner. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pertham. Okay, all those in favour, those against, declare it carried. We're back to session.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we could we'll bring the motion out of the committee of the whole into the meeting. I'd be delighted to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Do we have a seconder? 3 seconders. We'll go with Councillor Cameron this time. Okay, everyone happy? All those in favour? Those against, declare it carried.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, happy shopping and good luck to you.
Good luck.
May the odds be ever in your favour.
Question, Mr. Mayor, sorry, just a question, what do we do now with the shopping list, the priorities? It seemed to me as though what Queanbeyan and Pallarang were thinking of doing was sending it to all the candidates and say, of these, which are, are you familiar with any of these? If you were in government, what would you be interested in helping us with? Sort of, I don't think I haven't had a look at the papers very closely. Obviously the ALP candidate has made some suggestions of what they might do, but not in any detail, like nothing that comprehensive. And I don't think the Liberal candidate has really, I haven't seen anything written about what he intends to do if the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Coalition got into power.
Of course, he was only endorsed last week, so.
Yeah, well, that is a bit of a problem, but he was here looking at the market with Jim Molan, so he probably knows everything by now.
Sorry.
Look, through Mr Mayor, the intention was that we would take this advocacy piece and give it to all the candidates to say council's considered endorse this as their list of priorities.
Yeah.
And if you are a successful candidate, we would expect you to be advocating for these on our behalf through the usual budgetary processes of government.
Okay, good.
Assuming that they're in government, of course, if they're in opposition, they can quite happily give us that out of their back pocket, I guess.
And of course, and of course, if someone wants to make a commitment on any of those projects during the campaign, well, we've got something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dealt with that. Bushfire Management Committee.
So this is a committee that I actually thought was being managed through the Local Emergency Management Committee because they're all on there. I don't think they've ever met in the time that I've been here, but anyway, it was brought to our attention by the RFS that they would like a nomination from council for the Bushfire Committee. It doesn't have to be a councillor, it could be an officer who's predominantly involved in bushfire management. Unfortunately, I don't think we have a single person who in the organisation whose role is to be dedicated to bushfire preventions. It's usually part of the Tony Stevens as the LEMO. We would be involved in it, and we've got other staff like some of the planners are involved in bushfire management. It's part of their role in terms of assessing development in bushfire areas. So we don't seem to have an officer who's solely dedicated to this. But if a councillor didn't want to nominate for it, then we could look at nominating one of our officers.
Councillor Turner.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to formalise the informal arrangement that we've had over many years, where we've been ably represented by Councillor Burgess. And I'd like to nominate him as the formal, do a council camera and do a short pass here. To nominate Councillor Burgess.
Yes, Basil can do it.
You're saying they haven't met for 7 years?
Well,
Oh, they have?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
We haven't got any feedback. Yeah. But obviously, you only get feedback when you need to get feedback.
Councillor Burgess has been nominated by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Abbey. No further nominations? No competition? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Congratulations, Councillor Burgess.
Pretty bored.
I'll see you at the Mounting Pub.
Minutes of the Hamley Community Consultative Group. There was a recommendation. Minutes have certainly been circulated. Councillor Reid. Councillor Potham. Question?
No, in favour.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried. Minutes of the Audit Risk Improvement Committee held on the 13th of April.
I move the recommendation to accept it.
Thank you, Councillor Abbey. Seconded, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Any questions?
Through you, Mr Mayor, can I just check which recommendation, is it the recommendation as it appeared in the business paper? That we're, okay.
Through Mr Mayor, it's the recommendation from the ARIC Committee on Southern Phone, so it's those points up there, the report be noted and the improvement measures be endorsed. The delegations of authority for management members be clarified for the movement of money into and out of reserves. That's their committee recommendation.
Yes. I'm happy to support that and I'll do a follow-up motion as well, thank you.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare it carried.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to put an additional step into this. Now that we've accepted the committee's recommendation, and I want to thank the committee for their recommendation, excellent. Motion 2 is that a review that a review of the reserve portfolio status be provided as part of the quarterly budget reviews.
We have a seconder? Councillor Abbey?
Thank you, Councillor Amory. Just to briefly talk to this, when things work great, they work great. And when they don't, that's when the wheels fall off. So this step demonstrates that council will be seeing the reserves in a formal process as part of the budget reviews. This allows us as councillors to have good clarity on where the money is being spent and if it's being spent out of a restricted reserve. So that's what happened previously, and unfortunately councillors weren't able to make a decision that they were actually spending the Southern Foam Reserve. Now the money has been proven to be spent on some terrific projects over that time, but it's got to be consciously done, particularly if councillors have decided to restrict a reserve. And in moments when we're reaching for money to, put a roof or fix the roof on Memorial Hall, or where do we decide to take funding to progress a heated pool or progress the Crago Mill, $800,000 in its entirety goes a long way. So if you are able to preserve chunks like this, which was a bit of a windfall, it's important. And because I wanted to spend the money so much was why I actually realised it was gone, because I had projects in mind for it. And in fact tried to actually use some of the money to do up the laneway between Memorial Hall, which needs a lot of attention. And council decided, no, we'll go to the community and decide what are the priority projects, and then we'll decide how we spend the money. So it was disappointing that we lost it, but the good news is that we've taken it to the ARIC committee, we've got a recommendation here, and I think this one really ensures that council is where the buck stops and that we get to check it as part of that quarterly budget review process.
Mr Mayor, with the members' approval, I'd like to see the tautology removed from that.
Yes.
The review of the review, I would suggest, is probably not a good
Thank you.
idea.
So
Maybe
just-
a report in there somewhere would be a good idea.
So the reserve portfolio status, be provided as part of the quarterly budget reviews. So a report be provided.
So we're at the start, a report.
Yeah.
Report somewhere.
Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Declare the motion carried. Anything else, Mr General Manager?
No, that comes to the end of all the reports. There's no confidential reports this week. Give it a change, so you can actually close the meeting.
It's with much pleasure I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.
Before former councillor Frost goes to sleep.